So let's come over to the grid section. I close this tab and go to the grid. We have, to get started, a basic transition, which is only a blend effect from the source to the target layer. And now let me explain what the grid can do for you. And first you have the option to activate the grid, and in general the crop grid cells is activated. I will close this for now and activate our grid. So this is what you get. So the transition will make a grid over time and goes in and out and blend between those. So this is the basic grid setting. So very important at the grid section is the behavior between grid cells in height and vertical and the grid scale in X and Y, because this is a percentage of the grid corresponding to the screen or canvas size, and this is the amount of grid cells in the length and in the height. Okay, so to showcase you what I mean, let's say we have 3 grid cells in each direction. Right now we have a lot more than only 3 cells, okay? And this is because the grid scale is smaller than 100. So 100% means you have the whole grid in the whole canvas. So if you are at 100%, you see no grid, because the grid will happen here and here and here and here. So this is not part of the canvas. If you start shrinking down, you will see the grid being activated, okay? In this case in the x-axis. And if you do so the same for the y-axis, you will see the grid. Here we have 1, 2, 3 in the width and 1, 2, 3 in the height, okay? So to make clear, let me now switch on the crop grid cells, and now you start to see where the grid happens. And cropping grid cells could be useful to crop inside the single grid tiles, okay? And if you are at 95% of the scale, you can perfectly, and you are in the middle of your transition, you can perfectly arrange your grid. So for example, if I now go to 5 by 5, you will see I have 5 grid cells from left to right, and if I tap in here 5, I will have 5 grid cells in the height and 5 in the length, sorry, okay? So if you scale that up, you will see the grid, the cropping will removed, and if you scale it more down, you will see you get more cropping, okay? So a good starting point is 95%, so there where you can see there you can see what the grid will look like and how to arrange the grid, okay? So we have a grid cell center, which is 50 by 50, which is the middle of your canvas, and if you play with these settings, you will see you start to move the center of the grid, okay? And if you offset the grid, then you see what happens. You offset the grid in each direction, X positively, the same like negatively. If you overdo the settings, you will see nothing, and this is because you offset the grid to a point where no canvas will be there, okay? So this is the grid offset, works also in both directions, okay? Let me go back to 95% and let me undo this. So this is the grid, and we have a grid rotation. The grid rotation is affecting each single grid tile. So if you go to rotate that here, you will see you rotate the grid tiles but not the grid. This is where the transform rotation comes in place. If you like to rotate all of the grid, then please do so and rotate the grid, the whole footage. Okay, so now you rotate the whole grid and the grid tiles. So this is affecting all of your footage in the transform section, and in the grid section the rotation only is for the tiles. Okay, again, like in the transform mode, we have two ping pong settings for the offset and for the rotation. And this is because if you don't have straight values, you will rotate that over time. And so maybe the rotation is not finished by the end of the transition, like here. So we are not perfectly, and this is because we have 64 degrees. So we bring this up to 360. So now we have a perfect 360-degree rotation of our tiles. Okay, so what you see is that there's nothing in the background. This is because we have two layers. We have the source layer and we have the target layer, and we blend between those two layers. And if we start to rotating these tiles, there is some black issues here. And this is, as we told you or said before in the transform tutorial, this is because both clips are affected by this transition. If you don't like this, simply let the tile transition only affect the target layer, for example, and then we go to the layer modes again, and let's try source fade out, target static. That means you have only the tiling on the source layer but not on the target, and so in this case you don't have these black issues. Okay, and we have a cool fade of these things. Okay, all of these settings in the grid working over time during the length of the transition. That means if you scale the grid over time, or if you, let's say, crank the grid cells up over time, so we go to, let's say, something which looks not so weird, 20 by 20, and let's go frame by frame. So we start with 20 tiles in each direction and fade them. Okay, but if you like to have some kind like a zoom, you can play with the offset of the tiles, and now you will see we have these tiles zooming in and zooming in and zooming in and zooming in until they are gone. Okay, so you can play with these settings over time. And of course you can play also with the offset, so we can offset that to something like this, and this is what you got. So you have these tiles and they move into the right side until they appear and the transition is done. Okay, so many things to keep in mind and many options to combine. You already had the transform tutorial, so let's put in transform over x by 200, and you will see what this, how this affects the transition. Here we go. Everything starts moving but the tiles, and here we go. Let's have a look in real time to this one. Nothing very fancy, but yeah, it looks also cool. So the next tutorial will be regarding the time remap, and this is one of the powerful features that TransitionMaster have, and gives you a lot of creative space to do some very fancy and very cool transitions. So make sure to watch the time remap tutorial, which